Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Lentini, and I'm the host for the podcast Different Thinking for Different Times. And this is season 6, episode 2. And I have a very, very special guest. And, we've talked about small minded thinking over the years, expanding into limitless thinking, matching what we live in, right? The infinite universe that we don't understand. I mean, some people may think they do. I suggest we don't, that we are as far off as the Incas and the Aztecs when they were sacrificing princesses and babies to satisfy the gods. I mean, thankfully, we have a much better understanding still. We are living on something that is this small, right? And physicists have said it's even smaller. I keep this marble with the earth painted on it to remind me that, we are probably living on a grain of sand in relation to the size of the universe and all that's required for life, right? We're living on a miracle garden planet, and we take that for granted. And so part of enjoying the experience, I think, is forgiveness. And Dara McKinley, the structure of forgiveness. Now, I studied her. I'm going to recommend that you all do it. And we're going to make sure Dara gives how to contact her website. We'll repeat it a number of times. And as you know, I never suggest I found the way to live a life, and that you all can run away if I ever do. Hopefully a few will reach out to me and see if I've recovered my sanity. I would suggest that you experiment with what Dara is suggesting, and I'm going to let her talk about it. So with that, Dara, welcome to the podcast, Different Thinking for Different Times.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the intro, and it's a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. I'm grateful you said yes. And this is a fascinating story that you have and what you're doing today. So let's get right into that. Tell us about yourself, right? How you got there, and give us a rundown of what you think is important for people to know about you.
Yeah. So I guess the most important thing to know about me is I was born a very spiritual little girl, and I was born in a household with an agnostic mother and an atheist father. And my mother came from a Catholic family, so I had all these Catholic aunts and uncles orbiting me. And she very much had a very clear plan that she was going to raise me to be a seeker and to research spirituality for myself. So as she's executing this plan, I have these aunts and uncles saying, you need to get her into Sunday school, you need to have her communions, and, giving her a lot of pressure. And she just was very steadfast in this plan to raise me as a seeker. And I was so spiritual, though, I thought, well, if these people have the answers, if, my aunts and uncles can explain this feeling that I was born with, which I do describe as a felt sense of unconditional love. And by no means am I saying, am I an unconditionally loving person, but I truly was born with this felt sense. I said, if religion's going to explain this to me, bring it on. I want to know. So the compromise was they got me a children's Bible. And I must have been about 9 years old. I was so excited to read it. I dove in, and I think the first 40 pages were all fine. And then God took on a punitive, voice and a punitive behavior. So I remember very clearly at the age of 9, just slowly closing the book because it 100% did not match the feeling that I had. And from that moment on, I went on to be a seeker. And I spent 2 decades, my 20s and my 30s, studying alternative spirituality. And I have a degree in Buddhism and psychology. I worked in community mental health. And in the early 2000s, this is now going into my forgiveness story, I had an idea for a business, and I, in my naive enthusiasm, joined forces with people who I would ultimately be incompatible with. But the business took off, and so we endured each other for as long as we could. It lasted about 5-6 years. And then things fell apart, and I was pushed out, and I lost my share of the business. And at the time, I was half relieved because the situation was very stressful. So I was glad to be done with it. And I was half heartbroken because had been my idea. It brought me a lot of joy. So I thought to myself very clearly, Dara, this is a big hit, but you've been studying psychology and spirituality. You're in, pretty much since the day you were born.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the skills to get over this, and you're going to focus on your significant relationships. You're going to recreate your life. You're going to have gratitude. You're going to process your emotions. And I did all those things. And 3 years later, I would notice when I was folding laundry or washing the dishes, I would notice a negative narrative in my mind about what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it had resentment, layers of resentment in it, feeling like justice hadn't been served. It was just kind of this like righteous anger. And it wasn't huge, but it was there
Mm-hmm.
clearly. And
Mm-hmm.
while this is happening, I'm also experiencing a slow slide into a mystery illness that had
Mm-hmm.
the symptoms of anxiety, fatigue, and insomnia. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
I started to get very concerned. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old depending on me. And so my fear is then making the symptoms worse. And I just start spiraling down a hole.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never call myself psychic, but again, like I was born very spiritual. I have a very strong intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And when I have the ability, I think most people have the ability, but I believe in it with 100% of my being, that when
Mm-hmm.
I implore for some guidance from the universe, in a very strong way, I get it. And so I hit one of those moments where I thought, oh, wow, I need guidance. I feel completely lost right now and I'm terrified.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of begged for a sign or a message or something that would help me out of the situation. And the message I got back was to forgive. And like a lot of people, when they hear that message, I did not like it. And I can dissect why I didn't like it more, but I really want to like punctuate this moment I had of feeling annoyed that that was the direction that I got, because I know a lot of people feel annoyed when they hear that suggestion. And
Mm-hmm.
so I tried to like, disregard it. But it was so clear that within an hour I said, Dara, just get on. It's 2012 when this happened. I said, Dara, just get online, Google whoever has written like the 5-step how to forgive PDF, go follow it for, a certain amount of time. Just research it. You're a
Mm-hmm.
seeker. You're open to trying new things. Just give it your best shot. See what
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got online and typed in how to forgive, 99.9% of what came up was why a person should forgive. And the teeny bit I could find, which is some like lone person on some forum somewhere, crying out, but how do you do it? They were getting back, you just do it. And so I closed my computer and I thought, oh, wow, like I'm on my own here and I just can't do it. Like I really do need directions. And so I thought, okay, Dara, you've been studying psychology and spirituality for, officially for 2 decades. Like what, figure this out. You just got put a riddle in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
How can you figure this out? And so the
Mm-hmm.
question I asked myself that ended up putting me on the forgiveness path was, okay, I've been running a negative narrative for 3 years. It's not getting me anywhere. It's potentially making me sick. What is the opposite of that negative narrative? And my answer to that question was, oh, wow, I would bless this whole situation with the highest love. And there was a lot more that came after that. But upon answering that question, I had like stood up and taken my first step onto the forgiveness path.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 weeks later, I felt completely clear of all resentment and at peace for the first time in 3 years. And I remember thinking to myself, these were 2 thoughts that would change my life. And the first one was, wow, forgiveness is legitimate. Forgiveness is a real thing that works. Like that's, I'd been hearing about it for 40 years. And I was like, I'm so glad, to finally know this. And then my second thought was, and that wasn't pardoning. Why does everyone say forgiveness is pardoning?
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I just kind of thought to myself, whew, I figured out something I needed to figure out, onward with my life, but I would then go to like talk to people and observe the mainstream narratives of forgiveness. And within a 2-year period, I thought, oh my goodness, like there's so many people who want to forgive something and are lacking a practical path, or
Yeah.
who are seeing it as pardoning.
Mm-hmm.
and pardoning feels impossible to them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and then with that said, there's a lot of people who, a lot of beautiful books and a lot of amazing stories and strong testimony of people who do use pardoning to
Mm-hmm.
put the past behind them,
Mm-hmm.
and who've survived wars and atrocities. And I believe these people, like the pardoning definition does work for a lot of people, which is
Mm-hmm.
why it's so popular.
Mm-hmm.
I'm representing the demographic that it does not land.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look around, that's a huge demographic also.
So what's the difference between the pardoning idea and the forgiveness idea, or what's the main gap that you found?
That pardoning is actually a result of forgiveness. It's not the act of
Oh,
forgiveness. And the act of
oh,
forgiveness is one's ability to access and apply divine love and to identify actually what needs that love. So if we bring
oh.
it back to your story, that experience that you had when you flatlined, you had a
Mm-hmm.
tremendous experience of divine love and
Mm-hmm.
what an oceanic, experience it was. And
Mm-hmm.
that love is flowing through us and for us at all times on the planet, and in different ways. For me, it was just a felt sense. For some
Mm-hmm.
people, it's through family. For some people, it's through their passions. For some people, it's through nature. Nature is a huge place where people
Mm-hmm.
feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as profound as like what a devoted meditator or someone who had a near death experience how they would
Mm-hmm.
experience it.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's there. And so it's really about a person identifying how it's flowing through their lives. And once they see that, that's a medicine.
Yeah,
That's a medicinal force.
it is. Yeah. Well, I have another question though.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to the difference and a further explanation. But
Yeah.
you said something that was really important to me, and I think perhaps to the audience. You felt love, immense love, as a 9-year-old and even younger. What did it feel like, right? Because you had this knowing that what religion was teaching didn't feel right for you. Did you have moments or flashes of this love that would come through you, or feel like you were surrounded by love? Tell us about that.
I was born with a chronic experience of unconditional love. Like that's all I can say.
I love
And
that.
it's not, as I said, like I am a regular, human being who makes mistakes and has
Yeah,
strong emotions, and
yeah.
is swimming for my life, like like everybody else. Um, but it was always there. And I even
Wow.
once as a 5-year-old, I even like had a strong recognition of being in holy places. I went to visit my aunt, was a Catholic nun, and
Mm-hmm.
we went to visit her when I was 5. And I remember at the age of 5 waking up in the middle of the night and walking through the convent by myself. And I just remember, like, maybe I was a nun in a past life. I remember just feeling this holy,
Quite
sense,
possibly,
like,
yeah.
and you know, I was a kid who was very afraid of the dark, and so it's so interesting that I even did this. I walked through this convent confidently and felt God,
Yeah.
and felt comfortable and safe and just happy to be having the experience. So I think that I'm not alone. I think there's a lot of people who are born with a felt sense of unconditional love, and
Um,
then I also want to acknowledge, I think there are a lot of people who aren't born with a felt sense of unconditional
yeah.
love, but it is happening in their lives. It's just not as front and center as it is for someone like me.
Well, I'm going to share something that I have shared a few times on the podcast. I haven't shared it much, and I think I've written about it in some of the books. With it, when I was 5, I remember these feelings of immense love, not human love, not like love for my mother and family. Love for humanity would come
Mm-hmm.
through me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the reasons that I didn't become a Catholic priest, because there was the conflict between the vengeful and angry God saying, you sin and you're done with me
Mm-hmm.
unless you ask me for forgiveness. And this idea that this feeling that came through me was absolutely in opposition to that totally. I knew there was nothing but divine love, and that we're here to live our lives and fall down and get up and fall down and get up and fall down and get up. And at some point, hopefully we learn and do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're here to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what caught my attention.
Beautiful.
When you said that, because I've had those moments. Now, so the pardoning comes from forgiveness. So I'm not sure you finished that whole thought. So then I know there's people that say, I remember 9/11, there were a whole bunch of people many years later saying, forgive, never forget, which to me felt like they were still hanging on to the anger. And I've heard people say that, I'll forgive, but I won't forget. There's something missing in there. To me, it's a feeling that they're missing something, that there's not even a pardoning, right? If you won't forget. So go ahead with that.
So that forgiveness being, there's 4 mainstream definitions:
mm-hmm.
pardoning, having compassion, letting mm-hmm. go, and ceasing anger.
Mm-hmm.
And that forgiveness is, those 4 things is deeply, deeply embedded in the Western mind.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am. Mm-hmm. I'm coming forward one podcast at a time mm-hmm. to invite people to rethink that, their understanding, and to scrutinize these definitions.
Sure.
And to me, now that I've had the experience that I have, all of those definitions are putting the cart before the horse, and mm-hmm. that ceasing anger, letting go, having compassion, and pardoning are all potential outcomes of forgiveness. So when something huge happens, a huge betrayal or a rupture, like mm-hmm. 9/11, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It fills the bodies of the people who witness it, experience it, have losses, mm-hmm. with immense emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so to insist or invite or ask this person to now all of a sudden do this holy act of pardoning mm-hmm. and letting go, I just did a podcast recently where a person even suggested that it's almost a form of gaslighting, right? Because mm-hmm. the person mm-hmm. is pretty much like swimming for their lives with this tsunami of strong emotions, and now they're supposed to like have compassion.
Yeah.
There's just no room inside, and for that experience. And so to me, what forgiveness is for, or it's, I think it's a multifaceted thing, but I think one of the core key things it does is dissolve those strong emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And once a person can be aware of the fact that they're having those strong emotions and be aware mm-hmm. of the fact that they don't want them anymore, that it's a burden that's potentially unnecessary, and that they could actually liberate themselves from those feelings. And it's not to liberate yourself from the facts of what happened.
Right.
And it's not to hold people accountable for their behavior. Mm-hmm. Accountability mm-hmm. is actually, in my view, a very healthy thing. I have mm-hmm. teenagers. I hold them accountable. Mm-hmm. I think accountability helps us grow and be better. Mm-hmm. And so it's not, you're not inviting the person, if they let go of those, if they dissolve those strong emotions, they're not mm-hmm. going to lose the narrative or the story of what happened, but they're going to come to a place where they're not going to, a lot of the need for revenge or the need to
mm-hmm.
be vindictive is actually like a faux attempt to get rid of strong emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But all it does is perpetuate more suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So if a person takes the responsibility of dissolving those emotions, then you actually become like a vessel for healing and win-wins and creativity and the things that will actually make the world a more beautiful and better place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you're operating from a place of emotional congestion, mm-hmm. like you're going to see the world through that lens. You're going to be susceptible to negativity, to negative narratives. You're going to be susceptible to using substances. And you're going to just basically bring more suffering into the world. And why does it? That's the last thing the world needs, right?
It's the last thing we
Yeah.
all
So
need. Yeah.
forgiveness, it's like, how do I access, how can I use divine love? And so basically, I'm suggesting that forgiveness is a healing modality. There's a lot of great ones, and I'm throwing forgiveness into the ring as a healing modality.
Yeah.
How do I use this medicinal force of divine love that is spoken about in every spiritual tradition and religion? How do I saturate myself in it so that I can clear my body of these strong emotions?
And is there a process that you used? I mean, was there something you did daily? I mean, what do you say to people who ask you, how do I do this, Dara? How
Right.
do I do this?
So we're all anatomically designed to do it, which is another gap in Western culture. So in Western culture, we are trained to use the left hemisphere of the brain. And the left hemisphere of the brain is the part of the brain that navigates the external world. But we also have the right hemisphere of the brain, which Western culture says is for weekends and holidays. But the right hemisphere of the brain is actually the part of the brain that is connects spiritually and navigates our internal world. And so most people have not been taught how to use this thing that we were born with, that is created for us to regenerate. That's why it exists, is for us to move ourselves forward and heal. It exists for a lot of reasons. It's responsible for creativity. Again, it's responsible for ideas and spiritual connection. But one of the things it also does is help us regenerate. So I teach people how to use that part of the brain. And so you basically take a rupture, or you decide that there's something that you want to forgive, and the first thing I teach people is how to feel unconditional love in their body and how to identify how it's showing up in their life. And then the second thing I teach is like how to use that part of the brain to apply unconditional love to what happened. And then the third thing is I teach people how to circulate emotional energy. And so I see emotional energy as another anatomical system. And, just like muscles and bones and respiration, it's another anatomical system. And just like all anatomical systems, it just needs to move. And again, it's something that's kind of, it's getting talked about more and more. And I'm so grateful that this conversation's finally coming to the main table. But for the most part, it's been a taboo thing to talk about emotions, or that we have strong emotions, and how to, and then what to do in order for that system to be healthy. And in a very, fun foundational way, it just needs to move. It just needs to circulate. And when it circulates, there's a greater saturation of unconditional love. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. And moving it, is that about having dialogues with people about it? How does one move that energy better?
So the emotional world seems to do very well when it's seen. And so that's the land of therapy, is that you go to a therapist, you talk about your emotions, and one of the things that's happening there is that this person is seeing you and your emotions. And that's I used to be a therapist, and I witnessed this experience a lot, that someone would come and they would talk to me. And then at the end of the first session, they would be like, oh my God, I feel so much better. Like, what did you do? And I'm thinking to myself, like, I just saw you. That's all I did, but that's how responsive the emotional world is to being seen. So therapy, and when we have wise friends and family that, who have a compassionate perspective, and, who know how to have significant conversations, that's another very blessed place to get what I call it vitamin C, and to get the emotional realm circulating. However, therapy and outside relationships, they're not there in the middle of the night if someone's experienced experiencing a lot of emotional intensity, right? You have to
True.
know how to do it for yourself. And so that's what I teach people in the course is like, how do you circulate the emotional system when you're on your own?
Mm-hmm.
And then the final steps that I teach people once they have those skills down is, okay, every story has unique facets
Mm-hmm.
that specifically really need the medicine.
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
yeah. And so I
Yeah.
teach people how to identify those unique facets and see what they are so that they can receive the medicinal use of unconditional love. And once that's happening, then it's open highway. So I know that like it sounds dense what I'm teaching, but it really does kind of like one thing flows, after the next.
Mm-hmm.
And once people kind of get those plates spinning, it's like, oh, this makes so much sense, and they can move forward. And on the other end of it, you pardon because you truly have come to a place of inner peace, and I'm a very compassionate person. I have, as soon as I meet somebody, I'm very quickly able to see like the whole story,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
have compassion for being in this human realm and all the struggles. It's something that comes very naturally to me. So however, if and this is like another piece that we could talk about, the difference between compassion and forgiveness. Once you have like arrived to a place of inner peace, it really does release compassion. It really does release you let go. It's a totally organic thing. It's nothing that you need to compel yourself to do. You pardon because you understand, that like we're all swimming for our lives here. And
Right.
what's the other one? Ceasing anger. The anger's gone. Like you really did move it through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard people say life can be very challenging for all of us. And for us to have compassion is to remember that each person we meet, and let's suppose they're having an angry explosion at you, is that they're having their own challenge with getting through life, right? That there's something going on for them, that it may not be personal. It may not be
Right.
something I caused. And that to have that compassion for a moment and
Right.
not listen to the acorn brain that says, you better give them a piece of your mind and defend yourself.
Right.
Instead to say, okay, I see you're angry. Tell me about it. Is
Right.
it something I did? And humans, we've been trained to be, well, defend yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
and to just allow it. I think what you said was really key too, that the listening helps people release a lot of their emotion over an issue. And if someone is having a challenge, say forgiving me, if I say, okay, so then tell me about it. What did I do? And how can I make it right? And let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
That I may be helping them come to a place where they can finally release and forgive me.
Right. And that speaks to like a really beautiful feedback loop of the pardoning definition. I'm adding like another definition to the game, but like
Sure.
that a rupture happens and a healing conversation happens between you and the person that you've had the rupture with. And there's a lot of compassion and inquiry and generosity that's created from the healing conversation. And then people can pardon or excuse what happened and move forward into a better relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful. And I always say that ultimately, though, forgiveness, what if you can't have the healing conversation with someone?
It's true.
Or what if they're not alive anymore?
It's true. It's happened to me. Yeah.
Right. So so I distinguish between what I just described or what we were just talking about. That's interpersonal forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
There's this beautiful loop between you and another person.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's intrapersonal forgiveness, which is between you, God's love, and your ability to merge God's love with what happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's another path to setting yourself free.
Yeah. So you mentioned a course.
Yes.
How do people get to the course and how do they enroll and register? So give us some ways to reach your work.
Right. So my website is howtoforgive.com, which is what I typed in that night when I was looking for the five-step PDF. 2 years later, in 2014, I Googled that domain, How to Forgive, and it was just
Mm-hmm.
sitting there waiting for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also at daramckinley.com, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And so
Mm-hmm.
those are the different places that you
So
can
it's
find.
Dara McKinley. Let me spell it for people. DARAMCKINLEY.com. And then it's howtoforgive.com. And I think that if everyone took a few minutes to just go Google what she's doing and what Dara's doing, if you have a place that you haven't forgiven someone, you might find that. And then the relief comes for you. And it might even, listening to Dara, it might impact your health. If you're experiencing something that's impacting your body in a way, it could be something you're hanging on to that needs some forgiveness. And I think that's a worthwhile 5 minutes or more to investigate. So what's the course like?
So the course happens over 6 weeks, and it's actually a self-paced course, but I
Mm-hmm.
really encourage people to like keep up the pace, because
Mm-hmm.
it really is like a sacred process that you're entering into. And if you
Mm-hmm.
stop and start, you're not. I liken it to getting a prescription for antibiotics. When you get a prescription for antibiotics,
Take
you
it all the
have
way.
to take it all the way, right?
Yeah.
So it's the
Yeah.
same. It's the same with my course. And within that course, there's a teaching, there's homework, and there's also an energy meditation. As you heard me talk about emotions, it's very important for people to know how to circulate their energy and understand their energy. You can even say, like how you were talking about in the beginning, how you were born with that felt sense of God. Would you say that's like an energetic experience that you were born with?
Without a doubt.
Right.
Without a doubt.
Right. And so that you felt in your body, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I come from a very like somatic perspective that how I want to me the body is a spiritual entity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to get that up and running for people, because again, this kind of ties into the whole right hemisphere of the brain, and how much wisdom and guidance and spirituality is actually like pumping through our human body at all
Yeah.
times. And so
Yeah.
there's an energy meditation that's done once a week that helps clear out it helps facilitate clearing out the residual stuff, and helps people replenish, because when something really strong happens, there's often a very depleted experience afterwards. Like
Mm.
I just met somebody recently who I do a lot of podcasts about divorce and
Mm-hmm.
betrayal and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk to somebody who's in the immediate aftermath of something like that, you can see as you're talking to them like how depleted and
Yeah.
withered they are about what has happened. So
Yeah.
the point of the energy meditations is to get the energy flowing back into a person, and so that they can kind of stand up tall again, and really feel a deep sense of healing.
Yeah. Well, and you said something else too, that during your journey, when you felt disconnected or you felt lost or you felt like you were stuck, you asked for guidance.
Right.
And so say more about that. It's the infinite guidance is available.
Right. It's we are intuitive beings, and we're being guided all the time. It's really just a matter of learning how to pay attention to it, and seeing all the subtle ways, because it's a subtle experience. You really do have to
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to yourself, and to see how the signs are moving you forward, um, and testing them. I'm very practical. I don't want anybody to go out there and just believe, something. Like I always I always really test my intuition.
Mm-hmm.
I want to feel solid about it, because I
Mm-hmm.
know it's a very subjective place. and so I think though it is the most important thing that a person can be tapped into, because it really will navigate you through this realm
Yeah.
in a way that you will feel good about when all is said and done. And so again, like I just, because I guess it's because I was born with this spiritual sense. I've also just had this very strong intuitive sense. And so I knew in that moment that I could go see 100 doctors, but if I asked, if I just went straight to the
Yeah.
top and said, please,
Yeah.
like, it's also, I think intuition is very efficient as well in terms of, our logical mind can send us down 100 paths, but if we actually trusted our intuition, we can have a much clearer, journey from A to B. What's
Yeah.
your experience of intuition?
Well, when I was doing the sales training, I thought that was mine when I first bought the license. I thought that was mine to do. And very quickly, I knew that after, say, 2.5, 3 years into the 5-year license, I knew I was not going to renew it. Part of me knew. The other part was, no, nobody will ever believe your own work. How can you do your own work? And so what I said to God, very similar, is I said, okay, then if this isn't mine to do, then you'll show me what is mine to do. Very similar to when, you felt stuck at a dark time, you felt betrayed, and you had lost that partnership, your percentage of it, that company that you were passionate about in the beginning. It was very similar. And so I was passionate about the sales training, and then I knew it was never going to be my own, because I asked them about writing a book, and they said, well, you can send us something and we'll do a wraparound if we like it, yada, yada. And so I said to myself, I guess I'll never have my own work. And then the acorn brain was telling me, who's going to listen to you, Steve? I hadn't written any books by then at that point in time. So I just asked. And then little did I know, I think God knew that I needed to be whacked with a 2x4. And I had the experience of the hospital about 2 months after asking that question. I'm like I've said on the podcast, I was with doing the seminar training 1 second, and the next second I needed an ambulance. And, I sensed the divine presence and gratitude, even waiting for the ambulance.
So wait a minute. So you were in the midst of doing this training to go down this path of something that you did not want to do.
Correct. I was still in the midst of it. Correct. Yes.
And then you were, and so I see. So I'm seeing the other layer of the story. How the illness or what the incident completely took you away from this thing that the universe didn't want you to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I say that often to people. I write about it too, that in our darkest moments often comes the greatest gifts, and to look for the gift in everything, that life is actually happening for us, right, not to us.
Right.
And you shared that same intuition during the challenge that you had. It was in the midst of it.
To speak about how the body is giving us information. I mean, I know that's like a really intense experience that you had, but it was also your body showing up to say, Steve, this is not it.
Right. Right.
And if I have to like completely collapse to get you to see that you're going down the wrong road, So what I hope, again, there's so many layers to the work I'm doing, but I want people to have more of a communication or trust
with their bodies
before they hit these crisis points, to try to avoid the crisis points, because it really is a spiritual tool. It really is. I say your body is another mind. And it's giving you information, and it's not giving you linear thought, but it's giving you through sensations and energies and, where we feel strong and where we wilt. It's guiding us.
It's very true. I mean, I didn't have any symptoms of the challenges that showed up. My symptoms were the frustration, the silent anger inside about having this license and feeling like I would never do my own work. And so I had to forgive myself. And I can tell you that in April, when I was finally cleared to return to some form of work, so, and mind you, I went in the hospital in November, so it took a long time. I had friends telling me, you got to give up that license. I knew deep down, But still, I was telling them, no, I got to keep this. I'm going to restart it. And of course, I had not conducted one sales training class for 6 months. So if you're not doing any training or consulting, you're not earning any income. But I had $24,000 come in the mail, and I had 5 job offers. So eventually I thought, I got to give up this license. I'll do 1 class a week. I'll tell whoever hires me, I'll do 1 class a week of my own work. And it was based on my first book called Wake Up, Jump Into Your Life that I wrote in 2003 after my experience. And one of the chapters is about forgiveness. And so I allowed that. I let go finally. And by September, I had given up the license of 2003. And a whole new path opened. It came.
I'm curious, why, what was it about your upbringing or the culture that made you so attached to the license?
Yeah, very good question. This now is turning into your podcast.
Well, I like it as a conversation, but if we're in time, it's totally, I completely understand.
No, I love the question because it fits in too with your topic of forgiveness and what the work you're doing. So to me, I would never be able to do my own work. It was this little voice in the back of my head called George Ivanovich Gurdjieff called it the machine. Raina Maria Rilke called it the little hooligan in the 1800s. Deepak Chopra's called it the petty tyrant. That we can learn to run that voice and determine our own paths forward. Does that answer your question?
Is the hooligan a negative voice or a positive voice?
It can be both. It's just learning to train the voice, especially when it turns negative, telling us, who you can never write a book, or how is it that you're thinking of a business or a big future that's not you. If it's self-limiting, it's a negative voice.
The license became this
I was living from the outside in.
Yeah, it became this. It had nothing to do with the license. It was all about you telling yourself you couldn't do what you really wanted to do. And
that license
seemed like a solution.
Correct. That voice was saying, without a certification, without a title, you're nothing. Mm-hmm. And that's just not true. Because what that gift of that day, November 13th, waiting for the ambulance and feeling the presence of the divine, very similar to the feeling I had when I was 5 years old.
You're in Staten Island, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm from the Bronx, and I left and I just came back a couple years ago, and I left for a long time, like 27 years.
Wow.
And it's interesting to be back here because it made me realize how difficult it was to be a spiritual little girl in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
That in terms of there was no one telling me to follow my inner voice.
Yeah. I lived in the Bronx, in fact, on Lincoln Avenue, right across from the 3rd Avenue Bridge. I lived there really? I had an apartment for a couple of years. So anyway, I was living from the outside in. And when I decided after that experience, I was not depending on anything from the outside to be happy. And then deciding that any hurt I felt from anyone or disappointment was a choice I was making, that everyone has their own journey.
So if you could go back to little Steve when he was 10 years old, would you want to tell him that there's something inside you that you need to follow and don't listen to what everybody else is saying, because it's really a New York thing or an East Coast thing. The trajectory to follow the pressure to follow the external whatever, it could be the church or the schools or whatever, is huge here.
Yeah. What others think of us is none of my business anymore.
Right.
Whether I'm independent of the good opinion and bad opinion of others, that it's best to just know I have a journey. And when it comes to your topic, forgiveness, for people to embrace that it's coming to them for a reason, that it'll open a big door for them as they learn to forgive. Yeah. And your course, I'm going to take it. So I'm going to make that commitment to you.
Okay, awesome.
I think that that's a door opener for people to get that. And so how they find it is howtoforgive.com, right?
Right.
Howtoforgive.com, DaraMcKinley.com. And you can find you as what on Instagram? As at Dara McKinley or
Yes.
at Dara McKinley? I think it's important work. I'm grateful we met.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I think it's important work too. I think it's time for people to really have a strong, have their own spiritual experiences and to know how to use spirituality in a medicinal way. I think that this time has come.
I'm going to put information about your course and the other work you're doing on my social media and on Twitter and Instagram. And I mean, it's not like I have millions of followers, but there's 16,000 on Twitter,
Well,
and maybe a few will forgive me for posting it, and
no.
the rest might take the course.
Steve, I'm honestly thrilled to talk to somebody who had such a beautiful near-death experience, because I mentioned, near-death experiences a lot in when I talk to people about proof of unconditional love. I talk about people who've had near-death experiences. So I just was so excited when you reached out to me and knew that we would have a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm grateful. So in closing, what do you want to leave people with to think about? Like, give them a few of your thoughts that have made a difference, or whatever you choose. What comes to you? Let's follow the intuition.
That forgiveness is not one's ability to be unconditionally loving. It's one's ability to access unconditional love. And I guess I want to leave with, and that we're all anatomically designed to do it. And we just haven't been taught. And so those muscles are a bit atrophied, but once you get them moving, it's something that your body and soul really wants. Your body and soul really wants to be free and to have a liberated heart and to be intuitively guided in this world and being a vessel for for the highest good, essentially. And that forgiveness is a path for achieving that.
Yeah. Well, and the good we do matters. It's etched onto the fabric of time, at least in my experience. That's all that was mentioned was the good I had done, the lives I had touched. Let me ask you one more question. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Let me ask you one more question before we go. Would you say that forgiving oneself is also a benefit of the course? Can people come to a conclusion that maybe the biggest thing they have to forgive in life is themselves?
Well, because the course is so much about merging one's body with unconditional love, forgiving oneself, the course is almost kind of a 2-for-1, because you automatically are experiencing divine love for yourself in order to free yourself from what happened. And with that said, people do come to my course specifically because they want to forgive themselves for something, or sometimes they come because they want to forgive their parents, or whatever it is. It's still the same recipe. And so it's just a matter of like putting in what it is that you want to work on that time. But ultimately, the process always affects ourselves as deeply as it affects the memory of what happened.
Wow. You hear that, folks? I hope 1 million people listen, because many, many, many need to forgive themselves too, or as well as forgiving others. And I think that is a huge benefit right there. And I'm going to report afterwards, after I take the course.
Great. Yes.
I'm going to report, and I'll do another podcast reviewing it and talking to people about it. And maybe you and I can do a follow-up about the experience in a few months.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I love it. Let's do it.
All right, Dara. I'm grateful we met.
Yes, grateful we met also, Steve. Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
You're welcome. I want to remind everyone before we close, it's Dara McKinley, DaramcKinley.com and howtoforgive.com. Check it out. You'll be grateful, I suspect. I know I am already. Thank you all. Bye, Dara.